Police officers of Reddit, what absurd situation have you just happened upon and realized no one called the cops? My coworker's story of how he found out he had a heart defect, I forget what it exactly was, jumps out to me. He used to ride his bike to work all the time at his old job. One day just on his to work he drops on the side of the road, fainted. He was out for an hour or so before he came to. He was pretty beat up, nothing major, but cuts and bruises everywhere. When he came to, no one was around him. People driving by, people walking around. No one stopped to help. No one stopped to call an ambulance. He went to the doctor and got surgery done for an artificial heart valve. Another one. I was responding to a disturbance call in a trailer park that turned out to be BS. As I was leaving, I noticed a giant puddle of blood on the ground near a different trailer. Upon further inspection, I realized that there was blood all over one of the doors, complete with smeared handprints and blood dripping off the doorknob. It looked like a freaking massacre. I started pounding on the door and this junkie comes out and starts yelling at me for waking her up. I asked her if she was hurt and she said she wasn't. She then proceeds to go ape crap about all the blood. She has no idea where it came from. I followed the ungodly amount of blood to a trailer about a block down where there is a giant party taking place. I ask the group of guys standing outside where the injured person is and they all go G-code on me and say they don't know what I am talking about. While standing in the blood trail, I push past and continue down the road towards where at the end of it I find a guy in what used to be an all-white outfit that is now dark red, attempting to control his massive head bleed on his own. I later discovered that he had been trying to break into that other trailer when he drunkenly cut his head on the window that he broke out. My father was a village policeman in the UK during the 80s, so this is his story. Lady bought a house and after many days, weeks getting settled, she turned her attention to the garden. She started digging some flower beds, but as she was working she came across some small bones in the dirt, baby-size bones. This house used to belong to a doctor, so the lady puts 2 and 2 together and assumes he was a child murderer or maybe did some of the book's abortions back in the day. This lady is shocked and terrified that her new home could be tainted by this horrible past, but she didn't call the police. Instead she just avoids the garden completely. The whole thing weighs heavily on her mind as the years go by. 5, 10, 15 years, I forget how long exactly, but it was at least a decade. Until one day she can't take it anymore and calls the police to report the bones. My dad goes out to investigate into the garden where she shows him roughly where they were. He digs around a little. This was the 80s and apparently they were less concerned with disturbing evidence, and finds not a dead baby, but a small plastic skeleton. Poor woman had been living with guilt and fear for decades because of a kid's toy. The guy that buried the plastic skeleton under his new porch on here a while back should read this. This was only a few years back. Driving along a suburban road one night and a guy wearing only his underwear ran up to our cop car and threw a very large sofa cushion at us. As we slowed down to find out why he had thrown said cushion, he tried to jump into the back of the car. We got out and had a chat to the poor guy who told us he had used about an 8 ball of poor quality C and wanted to get our attention to help him. Kicker was he had been running around the suburban streets all drugged up for about 30 minutes and no one thought it was odd enough to call us. To be fair, it wasn't the nicest area. Former Leo worked a late shift and was driving home and decided to stop for some breakfast at Waffle House. I noticed a few people flagging me down as I pulled into the parking lot, which was shared by an auto repair shop. They point me to the back, so I pull over and turn my spotlight on. On the back side of the repair shop there was a dumpster, and there was a man laying down beside it behind the fence. I could see his feet. Then another homeless man walked out with a bowl and literally walked right by my car toward Waffle House. He was soaked BTW. So I walk over to the man laying down and he's unresponsive. I call in and EMTs arrive and the guy is dead. I still to this day have no idea how or why. I have the homeless guy waiting for me next to Waffle House and I ask him what happened and he said he was out cold. I was pouring water on him to keep him warm. Video from the auto shop shows guy walking and collapses next to dumpster. He wasn't shot or anything, so who knows? Heart attack, stroke, something. And for 45 minutes, this homeless man walked over to a water hose beside the Waffle House, Filled a bowl up and poured water on him because it was slightly cool outside and he didn't want him to get too cold. Water was cold, faucet water BTW. Literally nothing ever came close to the weirdness of that night in my entire career. Yeah, I don't know where the water thing started on the streets. It was very common to find HODs soaked with water or covered in ice by their junkie friends and family. Not a cop. I'm a paramedic, but I think this fits. My partner and I were at our post, which was in the parking lot of a strip mall that had a bunch of stores and one bar which was known to be pretty sketchy. My partner was taking a little nap. It was around 1 AM, and I was watching a movie on my phone, waiting for a call. Eventually I notice a few people coming out of the bar and just sort of lingering in the parking lot. A few more people come out, one lights up a cigarette and they all just stand around. I go back to my movie and 20 minutes later I notice there is now a much larger group lingering outside of the bar. Nothing strange was happening, but I thought it was weird that they'd all been there for so long, so I decided to check it out. I woke up my pee-off partner to have him pull our rig closer to thread group. As we approach with our lights on, the group notices us and starts to break apart. A few people scatter and I see that in the middle of the group there is a person on the ground motionless. My partner and I jump out and ask what's going on. Somebody in the group goes, "This guy is wasted. He just stumbled out here and fell asleep on the ground." I shout to the man on the ground and he doesn't respond. I check for a pulse and there is none. I start CPR, while my partner gets our jump bag and notifies dispatch. For a full 30 minutes, people had just stood around looking at this dead guy on the ground, some smoking cigarettes, none doing anything about it. There wasn't even a noticeable commotion. Nobody asked if he needed help or called anybody, and they probably never would have. The guy was cool to the touch by the time we got to him. Down for at least 30 minutes. We went through the motions but there was no saving him. We transported and he was pronounced at the hospital within 15 minutes. How freaking hard is it to ask someone if they are okay, or to dial 911? How was not one single person in that group not alarmed by seeing a man sleeping on the ground in a parking lot? I've had similar variations of this scene happen at least 3 times while on duty. People just don't give a frick. One time my friend was vomiting on himself and unresponsive after falling over in a bar. The bar just wanted him out and half my friends wanted to let him sleep it off. Turns out he had been drugged and would have died if we took him home. Drunk people are stupid. Not Leo, but investigate issues in child daycare centers. Staff members duct taped a 1-year-old toddler to a chair because they wouldn't sleep at nap time. One staff member witnessed the other staff do this to the child. 3 other staff saw the child taped to the chair. The owner saw it as well. No one said anything or reported to police. My office is civil, not criminal. I called the local jurisdiction and submitted all documentation I had found. The parent picked up the child and couldn't figure out why the child's clothes had a sticky residue on them. Boy, was she surprised when she learned what happened to her baby. I'm really late to the party here, but 3 weeks after I started, I was on my way to our off-site property control, just driving through a residential area to avoid the congestion and take a look at my new beat. I drive past a house with smoke pouring out from the eaves and 2 guys watching across the street. They pointed at us as I stopped and said, "I think there's a fire." Think was an understatement. This entire house was filled with smoke. Windows were black with soot, and still no call. These 2 guys were just chatting away and not doing anything. I couldn't see fire, but it was the 10th of July and a sunny morning. No mistaking a house fire in broad daylight. So I call it in and try to gain access and yell for any survivors. Keep in mind I have 0 fire training, but have half a brain enough to know that if there are any survivors in there I won't be any help to them, and will just be another body to yard out once fire does arrive. I get into the backyard by jumping over the hood of a minivan and sliding across like a Duke brother because there is so much junk everywhere. This takes a piece of the wooden fence and jams my radio key button open, so everyone can hear me breathing, yelling for survivors, etc. I have no idea I've got an open mic at this time. I lay down on the deck and look through the sliding glass door and there is only about 4 inches up from the floor I can see. I continue to yell for survivors but get no response. As soon as fire gets there, they make a slow entry because the front door has been barricaded. This is when I knew something wasn't right. Suspicions were confirmed when firefighters yarded out 4 children, a mother and father. The father was the last one taken out and the only survivor. Everyone else, except an infant, had been murdered with a kitchen knife. Doing CPR on a child that you can see is obviously dead is something that will haunt me forever. I never thought I could take someone's life until I had to try and help a child that was murdered by his father. I've never wanted to choke the life out of someone more. Talking about it helps, but still hurts. Pretty common where I work. No one calls the police. Probably the most extreme was a shots fired call. Extremely common. On a certain street that we really don't go down without backup. We drive through and don't see anything. Then maybe 10 minutes later we get an anonymous call about a shootout inside a vacant house. We find the door wide open, covered in blood. We make entry and find an absolute bloodbath. Blood, drugs, and casings everywhere. We recover an AK pistol that had been fired. There was evidence people had been dragged out. We only got the one call about it and no one showed up at a hospital later. Shot. Not in law anymore, but was for about 12 years in a large city. When I was a patrolman, I got a call about someone shooting off fireworks in a strip mall at 2 AM. These were common calls, so we would usually just go check the area and clear the call. I checked the parking lot and didn't find anything, but noticed the lights were on at one of the strip mall businesses. I won't say what business it was, but it was owned by a pretty prominent local businessman. Anyways, I got out to check and found the front door unlocked, which was suspicious. We had a lot of burglaries in that area, so I asked dispatch to call a rep for the business. I was clearing the building and found the owner and several other people, all really prominent, in a back room where a poker table was set up. One of the guys was sitting down and had a pile of coats in his lap, which was really weird, and he was acting like he was in pain. I saw blood droplets under his chair and asked him what was wrong. He broke down and moved the coats, then revealed he had a gunshot wound in his thigh. Long story short, these guys had a high stakes poker game every week and someone tried to rob it and things went sideways. The dude robbing it shot this guy in the leg, which some citizen heard and called in a fireworks call. The guys involved in the game weren't going to call the cops and were arranging to have a doctor come treat him off the books. Gambling is illegal in the state I worked in, but we honestly wouldn't have given a crap. We actually caught the guy that did it, but the DA wouldn't prosecute because the victim witnesses didn't want to testify or be involved. The victim recovered fine. One of the guys who I interviewed told me that they were robbed of over $30,000. So many. There's the usual drive-by shootings, gang violence, to the infuriating child abuse, child exploitation matters. Though to be completely honest, the most absurd situation in which no one called the police 911 was when my crazy neighbors across the street had their father-in-law have a heart attack on their front lawn during a BBQ. The guy's son was having the mother of all tantrums, shoving people, screaming, rolling on the ground, pulling up grass, literally broke a window, all while shrieking at the top of his voice, "Please God, don't take my dad." The other relatives allowed this spectacle to unfold before their eyes while they formed a semicircle around this dude's seemingly lifeless corpse. I finally looked out my window, opened it, and shouted if anyone had called 911. Got around 20 blank stares. I called for them, and the crazy son tried to attack the paramedics while they were loading his dad into the ambulance. Called the cops for them too. Common sense really isn't all that common. Started my 4 to midnight shift by heading directly to get to coffee. Beautiful summer day, people everywhere. I pull into the parking space and see a dude lying on the ground in front of a park bench. I jumped out of my cruiser, grabbed my first aid bag, and called it in. The guy was conscious but not really responsive. It sounds like a movie, but we were doing the old blink if you can hear me deal. The rescue finally arrived and took him to the hospital. I found out later on that the poor guy had suffered a severe grand mal seizure and was still postical when I rolled up on him. The frustrating part was the dozens of people milling about that couldn't even bother themselves to call 911. Never mind find out if the guy was okay. I do mountain bike patrol in a smallish medium-sized city. Was just riding one morning just after rush hour and spotted a little kid probably 3-4 years old standing on the side of the road with no parents in sight. stopped and asked him where his parents were and he just kinda shrugged. Called it in and some dude ran out of some townhomes across the street and said the little dude was standing out there for a few hours and he was watching him to keep an eye on him. There were people around and everything, but we never got a call for it. Long story short, he wandered out of the room him and his mom were staying in nearby and wandered out to the street. Place was a shelter for women and he was able to get out past the manager and a court police officer. Mom had died from a H overdose 3 days prior and when the little guy got hungry he got out of the room and wandered out to the street. No one even went to check on her either despite the smell. Obligatory not a cop, but I am an EMT. We were waiting at a light right as we were headed back to the station for our end of shift. We see a man running like Usain Bolt across the crosswalk to beat the light and a woman chasing him. My partner and I both look at each other and he says she's gonna get hit. Sure as crap the car in the rightmost lane guns it as the light turns green and the next thing we see is flip-flops flying and a pair of legs in the air. Female was plowed over and landed on her face in the street. We immediately turn on our lights and hop out of the ambulance. When we get to the girl she's unconscious, pee herself, and is bleeding from multiple lacerations on her limbs and a nasty head wound. My partner, who is a paramedic, starts his assessment as I go to grab a backboard and see collar and call it into dispatch. She wakes up and immediately starts screaming about her boyfriend leaving her. She stands up and tries to run after him, faceplants on the curb, and proceeds to lose a tooth. We finally calmed her down enough to get her onto the gurney. Mind you, she wouldn't listen and kept trying to walk around after suffering a couple head injuries. Once we get her into the back of the ambulance and out of the road into a nearby parking lot, the driver that hit her rolls up. By now firefighters are on scene and asking what the heck is going on. We give them the lowdown and my partner tells them we can handle it, so they leave, confused and somewhat trepidatious. We talk to this woman for a while insisting that she needs to go to the hospital, but she keeps saying that she can't go and she needs to find her boyfriend. Meanwhile, the driver who hit her is apologizing to me and saying she wants to help any way she can. The woman keeps saying she can't go to the hospital. After we got her cleaned up and bandage all the wounds, she asks if we can take her to her boyfriend's house. Well, as an EMT I can do one of two things. Either take you to the hospital or leave you where you are. She refuses transport vehemently, so my partner and I tell her that we can't take her anywhere. She then proceeds to hop out of the ambulance and ask the driver who just hit her if she would take her to her boyfriend's house if she didn't call the cops. Sure as crap, before we can even radio in that the patient was refusing transport to the hospital, she's rolling away in the car that just hit her and tossed her 8 feet in the air. It's not the craziest story, but one of the few that we just happened to be there for. My brother-in-law was on his way home from the night shift a few months ago and happened to drive past a house that was on fire. He ran up to the door, beat on it with no answer, broke the door down and ended up rescuing a woman and her children. I'm not sure how many kids there were. They were all fast asleep and had no idea the house was on fire. Not a cop, but this is my uncle's story from early 90s Chicago. Elderly couple calls in what they said sounded like a gunshot from the apartment below them. My uncle and his partner arrive on the scene and enter the apartment, weapons drawn. Standard protocol for a possible shooting in progress. Right in the entryway is what's left of a middle-aged Italian gentleman who apparently made the decision to end his life by shooting himself in the head with a .45 revolver. He's obviously dead. According to my uncle, his face was basically blown in half, nose missing, one eye gone and the other hanging from what's left of the socket. My uncle's partner goes out to the squad car to radio for the cleanup crew, the guys that come and scoop up the dead guy. My uncle stands at the door making sure no one enters the apartment until they arrive. About 5 minutes pass and my uncle hears what sounds like something moving inside the apartment. He figures the guy probably has a cat or a dog. Your pet will eat you if you die and they are hungry BTW. So he heads back in to shoo it away so it doesn't further damage the guy's body. He opens the door and the mother sucker with his face blown in half is standing there. My uncle reached for his sidearm and nearly shot the guy thinking he was a zombie or something. The guy just collapses again. Not like fall into a slump sort of collapsed. Like falls straight back, hits with a thud sorta collapsed. My uncle, after regaining his composure, radios his partner to call for EMS and then he proceeds to check the guy's pulse. Nothing. When EMS arrived they said there was no way the guy should have survived the initial shot and that they would have assumed he was dead too based on the amount of damage. My uncle says in his entire 20-year career, which included several shootouts and car chases, that he never felt more scared than when he opened the door and saw that guy, who by all rights should have been dead, standing there. You've been spotted by the curious cow. Comment below and let him know what you're doing. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.